In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King holds talks at the Vatican with Pope Francis on Jordanian-Vatican ties and the Middle East situation. The Prime Minister says human rights is a top national priority and pledges to further enhance democracy and human rights. And the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees expresses regret over riots at ZAATRI camp and urges refugees to respect the law. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King held talks at the Vatican with Pope Francis on ways to forge closer ties between Jordan and the Holy See and developments in the Middle East. The King said Jordan is interested in stronger relations with the Vatican to promote the joint message of love and peace among nations and enhance coexistence and tolerance as common values shared by Muslims and Christians. In that context, the King said Jordan last year hosted a conference on challenges facing Arab Christians and how to protect their presence and maintain their important role, particularly in the holy city of Jerusalem. King Abdullah welcomed the pontiff's trip to Jordan on May the 24th, the first since his election as head of the Catholic Church. His Majesty reiterated Jordan's robust efforts with all international parties to support peace between the Palestinians and Israelis. On Syria, King Abdullah stressed a comprehensive political solution to end the suffering of the Syrian people. Pope Francis said he's looking forward to visiting Jordan next month and praised the King's endeavors to bring peace and stability in the region. King Abdullah arrived in Rome earlier in the day at the start of a tour that will also take him to Austria and Russia. And before his departure to Europe, King Abdullah met Public Security Department Director General Tawfiq al-Tawalbi and checked on the duties and services that the department provides to the citizens. His Majesty, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, urged officers to forge ahead with integrated police and humanitarian services that enhance a sense of security and safety among both Jordanians and non-Jordanians alike in the country. He also prodded officers to pursue the fight against crime and deal with it according to the law in a professional manner. His Majesty voiced pride in the efforts of the police personnel and the sacrifices to protect lives and property. Tawalbi gave a briefing on the Public Security Department's achievements over the past year as part of its security strategy. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said human rights is a top national issue for both the government and the state. During a visit to the National Center for Human Rights, Mansour said Jordan has chosen the path of democracy and human rights, pledging, and I quote, "No one can stop our march toward democracy." The Prime Minister said the world's view towards human rights issue has changed, stressing commitment to the principles of freedoms, human rights, justice and transparency. He said the visit was meant to exchange views in order to achieve more progress in the field of human rights and not just to avoid criticism from international organizations or placate human rights groups. Interior Minister Hussein Majali praised the role of the Kingdom's reform and rehabilitation centres and said no violations were being committed in those centres. A regional conference to build a crisis response network in the Arab region opened in Amman with the participation of officials from 20 Arab countries. The two-day conference is organised by the Arab League, the European Union, the UN Development Programme in cooperation with the National Security and Crisis Management Centre. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour opened the gathering on behalf of His Majesty the King. The meeting will tackle current crises and various ways of addressing them in order to forge common understanding to lay out a working framework for early warning, preparedness, coordination and efficiency. In remarks, Arab League Secretary General Nabil Al-Arabi said the Pan-Arab Organization had signed an agreement with the EU to launch a project to enhance the League's efficiency in early warning and crisis management. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR representative in Jordan, said that he regrets a riot at the ZAATRI refugee camp in which a Syrian protester was killed and 29 Jordanian security officers were injured. The riot broke out on Saturday when security forces prevented a group of refugees from illegally leaving the camp. triggering protests in which refugees threw stones at police and gendarmerie personnel. Security forces used tear gas to disperse the crowds. UNHCR representative Andrew Harper said such troubles were unacceptable and the refugees should, like Jordanian citizens, abide by the law.
All in all, it was a very tragic situation, not only because of the refugee who lost their life, but because of the gendarme who were injured, and also because it created such a level of distrust within the refugee community. Well, it was actually the Brigadier General Wada who met with the elders in the camp. I was just in attendance at the time. And I think the message was that you are in this country, you abide by the laws and rules of this country. And I think that's a message which they have to take home, that just because they're refugees does not mean that they can do what they want. And I think it's also important in a situation that ZAATRI, that if people have committed crimes, that they also get taken to court and they go through the justice system like any other Jordanian would be if they destroyed property or hurt people.
Jordanian border guards have, over the past 24 hours, received 412 Syrian refugees who fled the civil war in Syria. The Armed Forces General Command said the displaced people crossed from several illegal entry points along the frontier and were escorted to refugee camps. The command also said troops shot and injured one infiltrator and arrested 3 others, including a woman, as they tried to cross the Jordanian frontier into Syria. It said troops acted in line with the rules of engagement, adding that the wounded man was evacuated to a nearby clinic for treatment. In a separate incident, 3 people were arrested by border guards during an infiltration attempt from Syria to Jordan. It said all those arrested were referred to authorities. During a visit to STORIA Museum in Mount Nebo in MADABA, Her Majesty Queen RANIA Al Abdullah took part in adding a few small stones to what aims to be the largest mosaic in the world. The project was given the name The King's Way. Her Majesty toured the museum, which tells the story of the region represented by mechanically animated statues and models, and incorporates a mixture of religious and cultural heritage of Jordan and the region. During her tour, Queen RANIA also met with Board of Trustees of MADABA Tourism Development and Heritage Preservation Association and was briefed on the association's goals and plans for the future. Her Majesty explained how the presence of such local associations play a crucial role in promoting local tourism, helps in their development and creates job opportunities for the local community. Right-wing Likud member of the Israeli Knesset, Moshe Feiglin, led a group of extremist Jewish settlers to storm the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. The extremists were escorted by Israeli police into the grounds of the mosque, Islam's third holiest shrine, in a provocation ahead of the Jewish Passover. Israeli occupation forces have banned young Palestinians from entering the mosque. A former Russian Prime Minister said Syrian President Bashar al-Assad predicted that much of the fighting in the Syrian civil war will be over by the end of the year. Sergei Stepashin, who met Assad last week, said the Syrian leader had told him that, and I quote, "This year, the active phase of military action in Syria will be ended." Stepashin is an ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin and former head of Russia's FSB security service. He portrayed Assad as secure, in control, and in excellent athletic shape after last week's meeting in Damascus. And in the ongoing conflict, the bombardment of the southern Syrian city of DERAA has left many buildings destroyed and forced many of its residents to leave and seek refuge in nearby towns. DERAA has been under the control of rebel forces for more than a year, but is still targeted daily by regime forces. For those who remained, living conditions are increasingly difficult, with shortages of basics such as food, water and electricity. Residents say they don't receive humanitarian assistance and say government forces have targeted the city with mortar shells and rockets on a daily basis. At least 8 people were killed in fighting between Palestinian factions in a refugee camp near Lebanon's southern city of Sidon. Local sources said the clashes broke out between fighters from the Brigades of Return, a group originally linked to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas Fatah group, and a rival militant organization. Lebanese and Palestinian medical sources said the leader of the Brigades of Return, Ahmed Rashid, and 2 of his brothers were killed in the clashes in the Mia camp. It was not immediately clear what triggered the fighting, in which at least 10 people were wounded. An Egyptian appeals court upheld the jailing of 3 leading figures of the 2011 pro-democracy uprising. The ruling comes as Egypt prepares for presidential elections next month. It marks a tightening of a crackdown on secular activists opposed to the army-backed government. Critics see their case as an attempt to stifle the kind of political street activism common since the uprising that ousted former President Hosni Mubarak 3 years ago. The court handed down 3-year sentences to the 3 liberal activists last December for protesting without permission and assaulting the police. The verdict was the first under a new law that requires police permission for demonstrations. The European Union and the United States have urged Egypt to reconsider the verdict. At least 13 civilians were killed in a roadside bomb that exploded under a civilian van in southern Afghanistan. The bloodshed came 2 days after a presidential election. Preliminary tallies from the polls showed former Foreign Minister Abdullah leading in parts of Kabul. But with ballot counting likely to last weeks, it is far too early to predict a winner. The 2 other frontrunners complained of fraud in the vote, which is meant to lead to the first democratic transfer of power in Afghan history. If none of the candidates scores more than 50%, there will be a second-round runoff at the end of May. Incumbent leader Hamid Karzai prepares to step down after more than 12 years as head of state. Russian President Vladimir Putin told the FSB security service to ensure Russia does not follow what he said was Ukraine's example by letting the West use local groups for destructive purposes. Putin's remarks signaled his concern that the West could use non-governmental organizations to fuel dissent in Russia. He spoke as pro-Moscow protesters in eastern Ukraine seized arms in one city and declared a separatist republic in another. Ukraine described the move as part of a Russian-orchestrated plan to justify an invasion to dismember the country. Kiev said the overnight seizure of public buildings in 3 cities in eastern Ukraine's mainly Russian-speaking industrial heartland were a replay of events in Crimea, the Black Sea Peninsula Moscow seized and annexed last month. Last night, pro-Russian protesters seized official buildings in the eastern cities of Kharkiv, Luhansk and Donetsk. They demanded that referendums be held on whether to join Russia, like the one that preceded Moscow's takeover of Crimea. The White House warned the Russian president against moving overtly or covertly into eastern Ukraine.
We saw groups of pro-Russian demonstrators take over government buildings in the eastern cities of Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Luhansk. And there is strong evidence suggesting some of these demonstrators were paid and were not local residents. If Russia moves into eastern Ukraine, either overtly or covertly, this would be a very serious escalation. We call on President Putin and his government to cease all efforts to destabilize Ukraine. And we caution against further military intervention.
An Australian ship searching for the missing Malaysia jetliner has picked up signals which were consistent with those of aircraft black box recorders. Search officials called it the most promising lead yet in the month-long hunt. The US Navy towed Pinga locator connected to the Australian ship Ocean Shield picked up the signals in an area some 1,680 kilometers northwest of the Western Australian city of Perth. Here's more.
It's a race against time to find the black box of the missing Malaysia Airlines jet before the flight recorder's batteries run out in the next few hours. This Chinese search vessel is trying to trace signals emitted by the recorder before it goes silent. Haishun 01 briefly reported hearing signals over the weekend in this remote part of the southern Indian Ocean. But while the investigation here continues, an Australian vessel has detected signals in another search area, more than 1,500 kilometres west of Perth.
The towed pinger locator deployed from the Australian defence vessel, Ocean Shield, has detected signals consistent with those emitted by aircraft black boxes. Two separate signal detections have occurred within the northern part of the defined search area.
Air Chief Marshal Angus Houston, who's leading the search, said the information must be treated cautiously.
Clearly, this is a most promising lead, and probably in the search so far, it's probably the best information that we have had.
But while vessels attempt to track the black box, search aircraft are still trying to find wreckage of the plane which disappeared on March the 8th. On Monday, Australian and Chinese planes returned to the small military base in Western Australia after another unsuccessful mission. Not a single piece of wreckage has yet been found, but officials have concluded, based on satellite data, that it ended its flight in the sea.
A $20 million Fabergé Imperial Easter egg, lost from the public eye for decades, is to go on show for the first time in London in more than 100 years. The 8.2-centimetre golden egg was commissioned by Russian Emperor Alexander III as a gift for his wife in 1887. The egg was last seen displayed at a 1902 exhibition in St. Petersburg before it was seized by the Bolsheviks during the chaos of the 1917 Russian Revolution and disappeared for years in the United States. Slightly taller than a chocolate cupcake, the ridged yellow gold egg sits on a tripod pedestal with lion paw feet, which is encircled by coloured gold flower garlands strung from capuchon blue sapphires topped with rose diamond set bows. Andrea Petkovic survived a set point to an emphatic 7-5, 6-2 victory over Yana Tsipalova in the final of the Family Circle Cup in South Carolina. Petkovic used her powerful forehand to collect her third WTA title in a match that lasted 79 minutes on the green clay in Charleston. Tsipalova beat Serena Williams in the second round, but her first WTA final ended on a disappointing note. Chelsea are hoping to have striker Samuel Eto'o fit for tomorrow's Champions League quarter-final second leg tie against Paris Saint-Germain. Manager Jose Mourinho complained that Chelsea lacked real strikers after last week's 3-1 first leg defeat in Paris. Chelsea, needing a minimum of 2 goals to turn around the tie, will only risk Eto'o if he's fully fit. And Boca Juniors beat Godoy Cruz 3-0 in the Argentinian league. Captain Juan Ramon opened the scoring in the 8th minute when he converted a penalty kick after goalkeeper Jorge Carranza brought down Juan Manuel Martinez. Emmanuel Gigliotti doubled Boca's lead in the 49th minute. Gigliotti also scored his second in the last 10 minutes of the match with a penalty kick. The win lifted Boca to 9th place. And finally, cool tonight across the hilly areas and the desert regions and fair elsewhere, while winds will be northwesterly brisk. Tomorrow, a slight drop in temperatures is expected, creating fair conditions in most regions and warm in the Jordan Valley. Winds will be northwesterly brisk and blowing dust in the desert region. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warm day tomorrow with northerly brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Now, our top stories, once again. His Majesty the King holds talks at the Vatican with Pope Francis on Jordanian-Vatican ties and the Middle East situation. The Prime Minister says human rights is a top national priority and pledges to further enhance democracy and human rights. And the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees expresses regret over riots at ZAATRI camp and urges refugees to respect the law. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is RANIA. Thanks for watching.